Fauci couldn't dodge this one.
The decision to fund dangerous gain-of-function research in Wuhan, China, will likely go down in history as perhaps one of the worst public health decisions. Frankly, the American people deserve an apology.
Senator Paul seemed ready for Fauci to avoid a lot of questions during the hearing, and he came prepared with a clip exposing how his private views didn't match with what he was telling the American people. And today we're breaking it all down. So if you enjoy content that cuts through the noise, hit that subscribe button and let's get right into it.
For years, Anthony Fauci has been the public face of saying this in all likelihood came from nature. He kept saying, it's the marketplace, it's the marketplace, it's the marketplace. He's been saying that on television up until recently. But what we find is that what he was saying in public is different than what he was saying in private. In January, in private, he wrote that looks like the wet market was a super spreader event. It didn't originate there. We know that some of the earliest deaths and sickness came from somewhere else. But then for years and years, we got dishonesty. So let's play the video so we can see a little juxtaposition of the problem we're dealing with.
Take a really good look at the animal-human interface and the fact that animals from the wild are being brought into wet markets. You have animals that come out of the wild that are sold at these open, what they call them, wet markets. Wet markets, where you bring animals in from the wild who have these viruses. The origin was from a bat to an intermediate host to a human, very likely in a wet market. And those animals should not have been in the Wuhan market. They knew that those animals should not have been in the market, and they immediately cleaned out the market, put restrictions on the kinds of animals that come into these wet markets. I think they should shut down those things right away. I mean, it boggles my mind.
I apologize for my voice today. I'm so sick, guys. But in many ways, Fauci presented himself to the public as this confident scientist who had the answers. But in private, he sometimes believed the opposite of what he was telling us. All of it is detailed in his diary entries, which Senator Paul released, and it includes over 1,000 pages, covering the years from 2019 to 2022. He also described a close friendship with Jake Tapper, and apparently gave him some questions to ask pediatrician Brett Gearer during an interview on CNN's State of the Union. The entries also talk about casual texts with several MSN figures, imagine that, like Dana Bash and George Stephanopoulos. But that's really just scratching the surface, because Senator Langford read the parts that stood out the most.
There were different statements that you even made in your private notes and your public notes on it. In January the 26th of 2020, this is before we had our first tragic death of coronavirus in the United States, you wrote, "It now appears using epi data that the genomic data, the first infection was in early December and was not connected to the market," which was the big rumor that was out there, was this wet market in China. "We know the market was not the source, it was the amplifier." On January the 31st, you wrote about a phone call. You wrote, "The people on the phone felt the mutations around the furin cleavage site of the spike protein could not have occurred naturally, since it would require an evolutionary jump that they found nowhere in bat isolates. They bring up the possibility this could have been deliberately inserted and either accidentally released or deliberately released by a crazy person in the lab, the former being the most likely." February the 1st, same year, 2020. This is, again, still before our first death. "There was not total agreement about the likelihood of deliberate insertion. Ron said he was sure that this could occur naturally, and we should not waste our time and divert our effort to pursue this. This is expected of him since he was the original gain-of-function person with Yoshi. Also, Christian was with Ron. The rest felt deliberate insertion was possible, and given the fact that Dr. Jingling Shi at the University of Wuhan has been working for years in gain-of-function in coronaviruses to allow adaptation of the spike protein to bind to the human ACE2 receptor, we could not let this go."
If we zoom out from Fauci for 1 second, Tulsi declassified a large batch of pandemic-related material on her final day as DNI. One of these documents was a report related to the gain-of-function research tied to EcoHealth Alliance, which listed the Wuhan Institute of Virology as a subcontractor, and the whole thing was funded by the NIAID. According to those reports, the researchers did a lot of work that would fall under gain-of-function specifically involving coronaviruses. Another HHS memo also revealed that the final annual report, which was due in 2019, wasn't submitted until more than 2 years later. So, that's a lot of convenient coincidences. Senator Paul, he wanted answers about it. But instead of clearing things up, Fauci went right back to invoking the fifth.
Understanding that you are under oath, the American people would like to understand your reasoning, your rationale for why you chose to fund the research in Wuhan. There have been, intelligence agencies, the CIA, the FBI, the DOE, have all come to the conclusion that more likely than not, the virus came from the lab in Wuhan. What was the reasoning? And are you sorry, basically, for making the decision? Would you, given another chance, say, well, gosh, circumstances now, as I know it, maybe it wasn't a wise thing. Can you explain to the committee why you chose to fund this dangerous research in China?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
This is the same guy who, let me remind you, once said, "I am the science." Of course he's trying to defend himself, especially now that we've learned a lot more about the pandemic, and even liberal circles have started questioning what really happened. But this goes far beyond politics or culture wars. If the virus did come from a lab, it would expose serious oversight failures in research that received U.S. government funding, and those problems need to be addressed before history repeats itself. Otherwise, we're setting ourselves up for another disaster. The difference is that next time, far more people will be skeptical of the scientific establishment and far less willing to trust the government's guidance. Let's be real, we're there now. But apparently Fauci may face some legal trouble soon, even with that blanket pardon that Biden gave him. And Senator Paul, he made sure to warn him about it.
Dr. Fauci, would you like to at least answer this one question for us today and let us know whether or not you've changed your mind on whether or not the benefits of gain-of-function research outweigh the risks?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
The chairman has denied your assertion of privilege and directed you to answer, but you nonetheless refuse and stand on privilege despite the existence of the pardon. The committee will have to consider after this hearing what appropriate action should be taken against you for the failure to testify after being directed to do so. It's against the law to obstruct an investigation of Congress. There will be repercussions to your refusal to testify today.
I really think this is the can of worms that Fauci hoped stayed closed. Even if Congress moves forward with holding Fauci in contempt, it doesn't automatically mean he'll be prosecuted. The committee would first have to approve it, then the full Senate would have to act, and then after all of that, the DOJ would still have to decide whether to take the case. But Joe Biden's pardon throws a wrench into the entire process, and it puts the Trump administration in a pretty awkward position. If prosecutors argue it's valid, then it becomes much harder to justify Fauci pleading the fifth. On the other hand, if they claim the pardon wasn't valid or didn't cover everything, Fauci can still argue that he faced legal exposure and had every right to stay silent. Either way, the courts may ultimately have to decide how far that pardon actually goes, and that could become the biggest legal fight of them all.